Welcome to today's expert panel. This is Defining Success in Teacher Apprenticeships, Metrics, Models, and What's Next. My name is Andrew Krantz. I'm a researcher in Mathematica's Education and Employment Division. I'll be introducing our panel and panelists today, but want to begin with some quick housekeeping items. All right, so today's webinar is being recorded and we'll share the slide deck and recording with registrants after the session. All participants have been muted upon entry and we have deactivated the chat feature. However, we encourage you to post questions in the Q&A feature throughout our panel discussion, and we will elevate audience questions for our panelists at the end of the session. The Q&A feature can be accessed by clicking on the three dots on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And for closed captioning, click the Show Closed Captions button on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. A quick note on our agenda for the session. We'll begin in a minute with brief introductions for our panel and panelists, and then start our moderated panel discussion. We'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the session for audience questions, then finish with some final notes and links to resources. Today's session will focus on a recent and growing trend in educator workforce development, teacher apprenticeships. While apprenticeships are traditionally associated with skilled trades such as carpentry or plumbing, the earn and learn model of apprenticeship has expanded substantially over the past decade. Studies suggest that apprenticeships help to strengthen talent pipelines, increase retention, and connect skilled workers to stable, high-wage jobs. As such, employers and workforce development partners have increasingly turned to apprenticeships as a means of addressing worker shortages in high-demand occupations. In recent years, schools across the country have grappled with persistent teacher shortages as enrollment in traditional education and preparation programs declined and the number of retiring teachers increased. Teacher apprenticeship programs have emerged as a promising and rapidly scaling strategy to address shortages, expanding from only a handful of states in 2022 to nearly every state in 2025. By offering paid, on-the-job training along with structured classroom-based instruction, teacher apprenticeship programs offer prospective teachers the opportunity to continue working while they pursue their certification. Next slide, please. And as the number of teacher apprenticeship programs continue to grow, it's imperative to define and measure what success means in the diverse context of education. Today, our panel is going to dive into some of these questions, including what metrics matter most for measuring effectiveness and success, how should these programs be evaluated, and what does the future hold for teacher apprenticeships and their role in strengthening the educator workforce. Joining us today in this discussion are three experts in the field of educator workforce development. Kwame Floyd is the founder and executive director of the Teacher Apprenticeship Network. In 2023, Floyd designed and launched New Jersey's first federally recognized teacher apprenticeship program, a groundbreaking effort to address teacher shortages and expand pathways into the profession. His experience includes efforts to strengthen teacher diversity through the New Jersey Department of Education, and to advancing equity in education as an advisor to the Obama Foundation's My Brother's Keeper initiative. David DeYoung serves as the Dean of the College of Education and Human Performance and the Director of Teacher Apprenticeships at Dakota State University. DeYoung launched teacher apprenticeship and educator workforce development efforts with the South Dakota Teacher Apprenticeship Pathway, focused on paraprofessionals working in South Dakota schools. His experience encompasses roles as an academic, a teacher, coach, principal, and superintendent. David Blazer is an associate professor at the University of Maryland College Park in the Education Policy Program, where he serves as the faculty director of the Maryland Equity Project. Blazer's research examines allocation of educational resources, including labor market policies that successfully recruit and retain teachers. His research has been published in Educational Researcher, Journal of Policy Analysis and Management, and Review of Educational Research, among other publications. And moderating our discussion today is Jill Constantine. Jill is a senior fellow at Mathematica and is an expert in teacher preparation programs. She has more than 20 years of experience in evaluating programs designed to train and support teachers entering teaching through different pathways. She is also an expert in teacher compensation and assessing effectiveness, and has led a large multi-site study of the Teacher Incentive Fund. For the Regional Educational Laboratory in the Mid-Atlantic region, Jill oversaw a work group focused on expanding the pipeline and training of teachers across New Jersey, and led a cross-region work group on expanding the teacher pipeline and supporting educators. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Jill, to kick off our panel discussion.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us, especially those of you who might be even earlier in the morning than it is here. Um, I'm going to facilitate a discussion for about 45 minutes with specific questions directed to specific panelists. Andrew's going to make sure I move it along so that we leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. As Andrew noted, if you have a question, you can enter it into the Q&A box depending on how you got into WebEx. That you might have to get to that by going all the way to the far right of your bottom of your screen and if you don't see a Q&A box, click on what are very small dots if you have middle-aged eyes. So take a look at those. And you can enter your question anytime you think of it. You don't have to wait for the Q&A session because we'll have it there, but we will address all questions at the end. Also, as Andrew noted, given the rapid growth of teacher apprenticeship programs and some of the first cohorts coming through those programs now being in the classroom as teachers of record, we're going to focus most of our conversation today on success metrics and evaluation, how we'll know if programs are achieving their goals. But before we get to that, we're going to start with our leaders of teacher apprenticeship programs, Kwame and David, giving a little bit of an overview of the structure of their programs because we intentionally chose two different looking programs so we could talk about different structures. So I'm going to start with you, David D. Everybody will know which David I'm directing a question to. If you can briefly describe your program, specifically if you could touch on how long the program has operated or how many cohorts you have, what kinds of individuals you recruit, what sort of training and mentoring is provided, and how resources for the apprenticeship program, whether it's from your Department of Labor or other resources, are used to support the program.
Yeah, thank you very much. So our teacher apprenticeship pathway is a fully online asynchronous teacher preparation program that I inherited when I started as the dean here just 4 years ago. So we've had an online teacher prep program since 2010. So that was a huge blessing for us to get started with the program because the students that we wanted to recruit into our program were all paraprofessionals in South Dakota. And I remember back to a meeting, I was meeting with our Secretary of Education and other key leaders in our state, and we were trying to address the teacher shortage, and we were predicting how many paraprofessionals in South Dakota actually wanted to earn their teaching degree. And we worked with the REL to create a survey, and our Department of Education didn't even know how to reach our paras. So we went through a big long process. We sent the survey from the Department of Ed to principals to forward to the paraprofessionals. And we found that 554 paraprofessionals in our state wanted to earn their teaching degree. And that is where it started. We were off to the races right after that in our state of only 900,000 people. So we started targeting paraprofessionals. We've opened up 3 cohorts so far. Each cohort has had about 80 students, and that's all dependent on funding. And we could have a whole nother hour talk about how to braid funds together to make it work. But we have 80 paraprofessionals in each group, and they are majoring in either K-8 elementary education, K-12 special education, or secondary education, because those were the 3 programs that we already had online. And I would say our program is like a 9.5 out of 10, how smooth it is going right now.
Thank you. Kwame, a little bit about your network.
Yeah, good morning. It's great to hear the success of South Dakota. We'll have to learn a little bit to get to 9.5, but we are a nonprofit intermediary. We're a statewide intermediary with the Department of Labor. And so our approach is looking at a little bit differently. I'll give the numbers first and then I'll tell you how we got there. So we work with, we work as an intermediary. So between the K-12 school districts, we call them employers, the institutions of higher education, and then the various government entities like the Department of Labor, et cetera. And what we try to do is we work our focus is on the employer. And so what we're looking at is, what does the employer need, similar to what you guys did with who's out there and what's actually needed. And then we implement based on what they're requesting. So we started with a grow your own model, which is to upskill and reskill the current schools community, so the current schools ecosystem. So you have paraprofessionals, substitute teachers, class aides, coaches, etc. And we found that there were thousands of people across New Jersey that wanted to be teachers. Some of them have been in this system for over a decade. We have people that have a degree, a high GPA. They couldn't figure out what to teach, what school to go to, etc. And so our job is more of organizing and collaborating these interconnected systems that don't speak to each other. Um, we have about 8 IHEs in our system right now. We have about 20 school districts that we serve. We have a little over 200 apprentices. We just closed out another round, so we'll be close to closing in on 300 apprentices across the state. And they range from alternate route folks, the folks that have a degree and they're going to sort of reskill into the teaching profession, to individuals who are completing colleges, to now we're doing a pilot for youth. So seniors who we're trying to entice into the teaching profession through a pre-apprenticeship to make them eligible to assume a job as a paraprofessional upon graduation. So we're hoping that once they graduate, they go to college and they can still maintain a job as a paraprofessional. By their junior year, they can even be a sub, and that's a way for us to make the profession more attractive.
Thank you. So as you can see, little different models. And yes, to follow up on David's point, we probably could have a whole nother webinar on funding and operations, but we're not doing that today. But if you would like something like that sometime, that is a very good thing to put in a Q&A, or we'll have ways you can follow up after. So moving on, let's talk about defining our success metrics. And I'm going to structure that by asking about kind of 2 different groups of metrics. First, and I'm going to start with you, Kwame. First, let's talk about how you measure the quality of the program so far, especially as you had candidates moving through. That might be quality of mentorship or clinical experiences or apprentice satisfaction. And then the second one will be more about outcomes for when your participants become teacher of record. So Kwame, let's start with you about how you've been measuring quality, and then we'll move on to David.
Sure. So we're only in our second year, and so some of the outcome measures we're preparing for it right now. And so, if we started in 2023, it became operational in 2024, and so we just finished our first school year. And so there's a couple of things that we're looking at. Ultimately, we judge it by what the employers need. So when we started this, we asked every district, what do you need and how can we make this happen? And there were a couple of things. Number one, they wanted to build a new pipeline, because the colleges and wherever they were getting, it wasn't sufficient. They weren't even able to attract folks. We have 600 school districts in this small state of New Jersey, and so even just trying to get traction between what's different about yours, or even letting people know that you exist, is difficult. So how do we attract folks? So some of the measures that we're looking at right now are, the first one is the impact of the pipeline. So we see ourselves as a workforce solution, and we don't spend as much time on the sort of pedagogical frameworks. And I think that's a difference between what we've been doing with residencies and other things, where we're asking the education sector to solve the education sector's problems. What we're saying is the education sector has a lot of solutions, and and we all have been working tirelessly on those. What are the additions? And so the pipeline, the diversity of candidates, not only from sort of race and linguistic, but also most individuals that are coming through alternate route or an apprenticeship want to do elementary, K-6, early childhood. And then we don't have as many secondary, math, science, etc. So then how do we attract individuals from other sectors into the teaching profession using this framework? And so the diversity of the candidates comes into place. And then finally, we look at retention. You didn't hear me talk about student outcomes in this. You didn't hear me talk about quality of instruction in this. It's not that we don't care about those. What we're saying is on the workforce side, what are the things that are unique to this initiative that solves a problem for school hiring districts? And we found that those were the things that they were most concerned about. I do believe, jumping ahead of myself a little bit, I do believe that next year and the following years, then we're going to have a conversation around, well, what is the impact of these individuals on the actual students? And then how do we then think about our retention, diversity, and attraction in a way that that mirrors or improves the outcomes for kids. But I think right now we're looking at sort of, I'm not a researcher, so I'm sorry if I use these words wrong, but we're looking at some of the sort of processes or inputs for whether or not we're making an impact.
Thank you, Kwame, and making an important point, and it's fine. We'll let's combine the questions. It makes sense. At 2 years, second year in your program, you're still looking at certainly focusing on process implementation, but then you alluded to, and now so David D, I'm going to have you address these all together. And then as we really have people out there in classrooms, teacher of record, first year, second year, how are we measuring success? What does it look like to be an effective teacher? So David, going to you, so you can take on both questions for your program. How do you measure the quality of programs as people move through it? And then what success metrics are you looking at as people complete and become the teacher of record in their schools?
Yeah, perfect. So in our situation, we're unique because the sponsor of teacher apprentices in South Dakota is a university and not a state agency. We can talk about the differences with that as well. But I found myself in the middle of the apprenticeship movement with the Department of Education, the Department of Labor, the governor's office, the regional educational lab, and the Board of Regents. And I could not keep up with informing all of the people how things were going in an efficient manner by calling them or talking to them or seeing them at meetings. So every time somebody asked me a question, I started adding it to a Google document that I call the TAP report, the Teacher Apprenticeship Pathway Report. I send it out once a month. And anybody on this call, if you want to subscribe to it, just send me an email. I'll add you to the list. And what we do is, as leaders, we know that if we don't tell our story, somebody else will, and we may not like the story that they tell. So I was like, I can't let that happen. So we started, people ask me like, well, how are they doing with GPA? Well, I can tell you, their cumulative average is a 3.6. What's your retention rate? I can tell you, overall, it's 91.1%. So we created this report that included like our early surveys, and then telling our story of how it unfolded, like the cumulative GPA. And then we started being like, well, what's not working? So every time that somebody left, we had them write one sentence about why it didn't work for them. And it's like ugly data, like the coursework was too hard and it was cutting into my time as being a mom. And so we just added all of this data into there to kind of tell the story about like, okay, yep, it's really hard to complete a bachelor's degree in teacher education while you're a working professional. So we were predicting that they would take 10 credits a semester. That was a flat guess. They're taking about 14 credits a semester every fall, every spring, every summer, because we incentivize them. We lowered the tuition down to $40 a credit. And once they paid for their first $1,000 a year, then they could take as many credits as they wanted for free. And then we created a competency-based option in there because we learned from a state that if they had a paraprofessional that's been a SPED para for 10 years, she got into their state's teacher apprenticeship pathway, and she got her course list of what she needed to take, and she needed to start with Introduction to Special Education. And she's like, what? Like, how ancient is higher ed if they think I need to take Introduction to SPED? I've been a para for 10 years. So she went to her local media, that went to the state's media, and I'm like, man, that could happen to us. So we created a process to allow a competency-based option, and we documented that in our report. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we collected our whole entire story, including qualitative and quantitative data, in that in one space that we update every month.
Thank you. Oh, it's very interesting as we think about what we're trying to track, and how do we know the metrics as we're on the path to success. So David B, I'm gonna kick it over to you. And since again they both David D and Kwame have focused a lot on, okay, how am I gonna know who am I getting in and how are they persisting? And I have to get people through the program first. What outcomes might you add, especially as they do start to see candidates start their teaching career, first few years into their teaching careers?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can start with kind of the usual suspects, thinking about performance once apprentice enters the classroom, thinking about their retention in the profession. I think another one, though, that I would focus on a lot is just employment as a teacher in general, right? So thinking about the extent to which apprenticeship models are encouraging and in creating interest in the profession that might not have existed otherwise, right? So to me, like that is one of the biggest ones that we should be focusing on, right? When we're creating this new sort of model of teacher training that's meant to lower barriers to entry, are we in fact seeing an uptick in individuals becoming teachers?
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. So let's move on to talking a little bit about evaluation. And again, there's been so many great thoughts, and we're starting to get some questions both about operations and about impact. So we're going to cover as much ground as we can. But let's move on to evaluation now that we have some success metrics, both as we people go through the program and as they become teachers of record, for approaches that are most feasible, most rigorous for evaluating the impact of these programs. And again, with all these different success metrics in mind, from what's happening to the workforce, what's happening to individuals in the workforce, and what's happening in classrooms. So David B, I'm going to start with you also. What lessons can we draw from studies of teacher preparation or other labor market training programs to inform evaluations of apprenticeship programs, and are there limitations to some of our current evaluation methods?
Yeah, I think one lesson we can draw is that I think that the literature on teacher preparation suggests that lots of different there's a ton of heterogeneity in performance, in teachers' performance, based on where they were trained or whether it was through an alternative route or a traditional route. But kind of one finding that seems to be somewhat consistent in my mind is that the more hands-on experience individuals get, the better they do kind of once they enter the classroom. And that's intuitive. And that's exactly, I think, why I and so many others are excited about apprenticeship models, right? Is that we just give as much hands-on experience as we can. So I think that that's kind of one thing to take with us, is to like lead with that hypothesis that the kind of more hands-on experience one can get, the better. But there are kind of sub questions to that. I think we'll kind of get to this a little bit later on about what does that experience look like, right? So that's one. And the second one, I think, goes back to my point before about kind of this employment, right? And the kind of state of the teacher workforce. I'd say that, by and large, we know very little about what works to encourage individuals to become teachers. We know a lot. We have a lot of descriptive evidence about what are barriers to entry, how they disproportionately can affect Black and non-Black individuals of color. And yet we know very little about policies and programs that work to increase interest in the profession. And there's something so appealing about apprenticeship models. They're built to say, like, let's show you the best of teaching, right? Let's put you in a classroom, give you the opportunity to work with kids. Let's pay you for that work, right? So let's immediately decrease some of those barriers. And so there's a strong hypothesis that this is going to create the sorts of pipelines and pathways into the profession that Kwame was talking about. But that's kind of, we need to study apprenticeship models that way, right? Does exposure, access to an apprenticeship model increase the likelihood that individuals enter this profession.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Very helpful. And some of the questions we'll be taking on later are related to this. So Kwame, I'll start with you. How have you approached evaluation in your own program, and what approaches, success metrics are most important to, or how do you think about your stakeholders and what they want to know from evaluation?
Sure. I think David B hit one of what I think is the most important and unique aspects of what we're doing with the apprenticeship. We've seen residency models kind of mirror what we're doing on this sort of how to teach teachers, right? But this is not new. There's research back to the 70s and 80s around sort of grow your own models. That has been there. I think we know how to do that in the education sector. It's really great to hear how David D over in South Dakota, like they're innovating it with AI and self-paced lessons. But at the heart of it, we know sort of how to teach teachers. The thing is, how do we attract teachers? How do we upskill individuals to the teaching profession? How do we reskill individuals into the teaching profession? How do we, even though we're 2 years in and all this stuff has been happening for a long time, and alternate routes has been around for a long time, when we go and speak to people, there's still oh wait, I can teach and I didn't have a degree in teaching. There's still that. They don't even know. It's an insular profession. You think that you have to start at the start as a 19 or 20-year-old. You think that you have to have, this degree and this sort of rigid experience, and you don't realize we don't make it sort of attractive for folks to come in. So if you are a researcher, a lawyer, a scientist, it doesn't. We don't have a mechanism to communicate that you can actually reskill and become a teacher in these high need areas, and that is one of the key areas that we're looking at. On one side, on the second side is just as a measure is. We have individuals, and this is really important to us, we have individuals in our communities, in every school's community, who have deep ties to that community because they've been working there for a very long time. The average age for us is 41 years old. When we first 41 years old, about a 3.0 GPA, there's no reason that they shouldn't be. And the average number of years is 7 years working in the schools. So why weren't you a teacher? And then we come up with all these barriers. So the question for us as an intermediary, as a workforce initiative, is not that we're going to reinvent the wheel and try to teach how to be a teacher better. There's a mechanism by that. But how do you have access? And I think that with the apprenticeship programs, a key thing that we need to look at is access. Who has it? And how do we create more of it so that the teacher pipeline is more robust? All of this doesn't matter if there's not humans. I know we're doing a lot of AI stuff, but there has to be a human who's interested in doing this, and how do we attract them? And I think that this model, in our opinion, is one that can be additive if we leverage it as a workforce initiative to attract new talent into the profession. I think this is one of the first times that we've been able to do this in the education sector by looking outside of the education sector for some support.
Thank you. And some of this discussion is addressing some of the questions we already have. David, I would, in terms of evaluating programs, you can also contribute or add to any of those kind of points that David B. or Kwame has raised, but also how are you balancing, or do you have to balance the idea of who comes into the programs, how are they being taught, like what's that metric, and then that longer term metric, some of the kind of things that David B. and Kwame have raised. Are they retained in the classroom? Are they effective in the classroom?
I agree with everything both of them said. They're crushing it. But how we decided who got into the program, we were anticipating more applicants than we had money to serve in that first year. And we had no guarantee of a cohort 2 or a cohort 3 or so on. So we needed to prove that this concept worked in our state really well. And we were pretty thoughtful, mostly with help from our friends at the REL and Mathematica, especially, deciding that we would rely heavily on a principal's recommendation of who they wanted to get into the program. So we would send anonymous evaluations to principals saying, hey, these are the people in your district that applied. You know, rank them or tell how highly do you recommend these people. If I could go back in time, I would change nothing on that, because what happened is it created a the paraprofessional knew that their principal believed in them, and they were like, okay, somebody sees me maybe for the first time in a long time, and they were ready to go. And I think that's one of the reasons why you know, we have a 91% retention rate, which smashes all retention rates at our university for any program, by the way. So it's that's the only thing that I want to add.
Thank you. David B, given the range of issues people have put on the table, is it too soon to be evaluating teacher apprenticeship programs in what we might think of a traditional way? Gee, you're in the classroom. Are you an effective teacher or not? Do you stay in that classroom? And a part two, is it too soon, or as we've touched on, how do we think about, and this is related to some of the questions we're getting already, broadening some of those outcomes beyond what we traditionally think about, not just did someone end up in the classroom, are they effective? Are we lowering that barrier? Are we getting essentially giving access to the teaching profession more through these programs than others? How would we know that?
I don't think it's too soon. I mean, I obviously I hear voices, you know, out of the corner saying you want to wait for programs to mature and to grow into what they're kind of meant to be in order before you evaluate kind of with a big E. But you can always we're in the education space. Like, we should be learning as we're going, right? So I think there's lots that we can learn now through different components of evaluation. And so as an example, to kind of build on your second point about kind of what else kind of would be asking beyond these kind of big questions of how effective are apprentices once they enter the classroom, are things like, what is it about the apprenticeship model that's appealing to candidates? Right. I think that those are the sorts of questions that I would be interested in right away. Right. So to the point before that I was making, that Kwame built on, around you know, there's this hypothesis that the apprenticeship model is going to be appealing because of the decreased barriers to entry, opportunities for kind of immediate hands-on experience, immediate employment, and opportunities to earn money. Right, there are kind of lots of reasons, but the kind of initial evaluation or initial kind of research work should be actually testing those hypotheses. Right, saying, what is it about this model that may be kind of more attractive than traditional teacher prep that goes for undergrad, or even kind of alternative route teacher certification programs that makes that appeals to certain individuals.
Great, thank you, very helpful. Let's do a little bit of looking ahead, and then we'll jump to some of the questions that go beyond some of the things we've raised already. And just a reminder to the audience, you can enter your questions at any time. We have a few in there now. Building off of David B's points about what kind of things should we be looking toward, what evaluation, how it might help us think about and strengthen the programs. Kwame, I'm going to ask you specifically for your program, what sort of data or research would help you strengthen your program?
So I think that there are two big buckets of folks that we're really curious about with this model. And again, we're trying to look at what already exists, where's all the research already, and what's the sort of new thing. And we're looking at incumbent workers versus new hires. So you grow your own versus how you're attracting folks. And those are two different groups of folks that the apprenticeship program is supporting specifically. So on the incumbent workers, the grow your own approach, I think all the questions and everything should apply. Sort of, you know, what is their retention? What's their, you know, when I told you that there's 7 years average of the classroom, how long are these folks in a school before, you know, before they're there? What's their experience and barriers to ever becoming a teacher? Why is it taking them 7 years to now do this? So I think that on the incumbent workers, to what extent does this upskill the school's community to solve their own problems? And I think there's a lot of things that we're curious around, because it's easiest now to recruit from within, especially as it's harder to attract folks in general. So generally, they're going to stay within, proximity to the districts. And then the new hires. So to what extent does the apprenticeship program provide a pathway into the profession for successful professionals? We see that there's a number of changes happening to the teacher pipeline on the undergrad side, right? So it becomes a little less attractive. I have a senior in high school. She's going to go to college next year. Her and her friends, the teaching is not even in the universes of things that they're talking about. And I do this work. So that's really interesting to see how this next generation is thinking about this. And so what we're making a huge bet on is that the pipeline of teachers will generally come from reskilling individuals who are already successful in other places, particularly in the secondary content areas, because it's going to be a little difficult to convince an industrial engineer to forego, the salary that they're going to get to become a teacher immediately. But in the second half of their career or in the mid part of their career, they may be interested. And so how can this pipeline attract and keep them? And then obviously we need to figure out, how effective are they? Does their sort of success in other sectors translate to success for kids? I mean, there's a lot that we can go into there, but those are the two groups that we're really interested in, to see whether or not this is strengthening the teacher pipeline.
Thank you. And we will get to those kind of distinctions as some of the questions are coming in. Before we do that, though, David D., given, especially as you described your program, you sat there in the middle of different state agencies, lots of different stakeholders, and have learned to navigate that to contribute to the success of your program. How do you envision that collaboration with state agencies? How do they envision, or how could they work with your programs or teacher apprenticeship programs broadly to help with that measurement, knowing what's working? What kind of collaboration do you need from them to improve all that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we set this all up, we decided that every organization or group that helps us, we wanted them to feel like they had ownership in the South Dakota apprenticeship pathway. We didn't want it to be all about Dakota State University. So the Department of Ed thinks it's their program, and it is. The Department of Labor thinks it's their program, and it is. I could go through all those agencies. And so, I'll read news stories about the teacher apprenticeship pathway that I'm working on 30 hours a week for 3.5 years. And like our university won't be mentioned at all. And that is okay, because we want people to have ownership. And that as a leader, like that's one of the lessons that I learned, how important that is. Now, your question about how can we utilize them in the next steps of this? For example, right now we're staring at 72 teacher apprentice, we call them tappers. We have 72 tapper graduates in our state, and they are working and they got hired right away. And all 72 have stayed in our state, which when you're using state dollars, that's an important thing for me to tell legislators and representatives and the governor that's working. And but now we need to figure out, like, okay, is this do they feel more prepared? What is the principal's perceptions of hiring outside people or growing their own from within? And I predict that this demographic of people will be some of the most studied educators that our state has ever seen. So I have a team of professors that they're doing all their IRBs about studying our tappers. So that's exciting to see as well. And before I forget, I'm going to put a little plug in for Kwame's talk about youth apprenticeships. I think that's the next movement. And we've started a paraprofessional apprenticeship pathway where students that want to become teachers between the ages of 16 and 18 can be hired as a para. The school district reimburses all of or pays the person because they're an apprentice, and the Department of Labor reimburses all of those wages, and they can take 12 credits at Dakota State University. That's how it's set up overall, but I didn't want to lose that. Sorry.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I'm actually going to start a little bit, some follow-on questions and combine some questions that we're getting from the audience. So audience, please keep sending them in. So the first one, going back to something, Kwame, both you and David D referenced, and David B, you mentioned, like, this is going to be how we also think about evaluating the success of this program. There's that, both questions we're interested in. So how many career changers are you getting in these programs? How many are, and by career changers, I'm going to assume they maybe aren't in schools at all. You referenced specifically, Kwame, especially people who might be suited to teaching secondary schools. They're in science or engineering or something like that. Do you know yet how many career changers you might be getting? And then David D, as a follow-on for you, how are you thinking about that? Are there people outside of schools, outside of the paraprofessionals who are aware of your program, and is that part of one of your expansion paths? So Kwame, I'll start with you on career changers.
Sure. So in our first year, 95% of our folks were growing your own. So they were individuals that were in sort of what David D said, hey, principals, school districts, who are the best and brightest that you want to be a teacher? That was sort of the testing point for it. So virtually all of them, I think it's 95 or 97%, something ridiculous like that. I think maybe one or two people weren't. When we implemented our first year, then we went back to the districts, back to the principals, and said, okay, we've seen success. A lot of these individuals have upskilled. Now they're teaching, et cetera. Those are good things. What is it that you need? And what they said was, it's not that we need to grow our own. We actually need to attract more people into it. So it's not even such that we have all these people here that need to be upskilled. We need, there's talent gaps. And so what we did, again, we're an intermediary, and so we just try to fill the gaps. We found we needed to attract more folks, so we hired a director of recruitment to focus on supporting each school district. When we put up Teacher Apprenticeship Network, by just, and this probably happens across the country, even when, well, one, we've had a really, really, really high response. I mean, we've had over 1,000 applications in our first year. I mean, it's been incredible. But even when they don't apply to us, it draws people to the district itself. It just draws more eyes. And so we're seeing that. But in our second year, now I think we're at 13 or 15%, and we were intentional about trying to attract folks from outside of the profession. There's a lot of challenges there. I can go down that. But what we're doing is we're saying, okay, school, now that you've let us know what that is, what are the other workforce systems in place that districts and our education sector have never touched? So we have a partnership with, like, the One Stop now. We're working with the workforce boards where they have flyers that are going out. And so what we're trying to do is look at where existing structures are and then pull them into the profession. It's really helpful when they're already vetted and they have, we have some SNAP participants and some TANF participants, and they already have some structures in place. And that helps us to then to reskill them. Right now, it's about 15%. We would love to see it somewhere around 50-50, but that causes its own implementation challenges as school districts hired much differently than sort of like a manufacturer. So we're trying to figure that out. We want that number to increase over time, but right now we're kind of holding steady, I think between 10 and 15% for now. Next year, we're going to increase it a little bit to kind of figure out, whether or not this solves that problem.
So David D, your origin story as you started is different. You right away identified over 500 people already in schools who are interested in being teachers. But how do you think about that as your program grows? Is there enough to focus still mainly within schools, or are you also thinking about drawing in folks from outside?
Great question. I'm kind of jealous of what Kwame's doing with, growing your own and attracting, because we are only focused on grow your own right now, because we have hundreds of applicants for 80 spots every year. And we are hearing, we have lots of people that say, hey, I became a para and I'm going to start applying to your program and I'm going to get started in hopes that I get in so that I get kind of the financial benefits as well. So that's kind of how we're attracting new people into the profession, which is great to hear. But right now in South Dakota, you have to be a working paraprofessional in a school in order to be considered for the teacher apprenticeship.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Um, it's raising. Let me get to one other question that, and then I'll come back to some others that are related to this line. Somebody asked though, either model, the model certainly you have in South Dakota, David, but Kwame also the model in New Jersey. Do you have challenges making sure you have enough mentors to support the apprenticeship? I mean, you have teaching shortages, and I'll start with you, David, since your model is, coming, starting with paraprofessionals already in the schools. Given their teaching shortages, do you have enough mentors for this model? And maybe something else we can touch on. Do you have enough, and are they good mentors? So I'll start with you, David D, and then Kwame.
Yeah, good question. So every one of our teacher apprentices has a primary mentor and a secondary mentor. And in working with our Department of Education, the Department of Ed said, hey, we already do mentoring for new teachers. Let's tweak that model and let's use that model for primary mentors that are usually in the same school as the tapper. And we'll take care of paying that mentor and figuring that out. And we said, great. And we worked with the REL to set up the secondary mentoring. So we dug into some peer-reviewed research to figure out what would work. And we came across an idea of hiring recently retired education professors. And that turned out to be kind of the secret sauce of our mentoring, because we would have, like, the dean that I replaced. She mentors a lot of teacher apprentices. So she reaches out to them and then they'll say, hey, I'm having a lot of struggles with this specific math class. And she's like, oh, I know the cell phone number of the person that you can get online tutoring support tonight. I bet we can get you hooked up tonight yet. And so I'm like, I didn't even know that existed, right? So with hiring people like really close to understanding what a student may be going through and how to connect them to resources in real time was, I think, is we're hearing from teacher apprentices that has helped their retention. So then we also, since our program's online, we had a tapper get together where we paid their mileage to drive to our campus to meet their professors in person. And like the emotions that this group of people had when they saw their mentors, like as secondary mentors, they were hugging, and like their primary mentors were so proud of them, and they'd meet their professors. So adding that human component to the mentoring, that they have opportunities to meet these people in person as well, we have found to be pretty special, to the point where the media like loves that and did a whole bunch of stories about it, and it's pretty cool.
Thank you. Kwame, in your program.
We're gonna have to go down to Dakota and figure out what you guys are doing down there. Mentoring is the #1 challenge that we have with the model, and here's why. For the apprenticeships to make its greatest impact, it needs to be in the places that it's most needed, right? So you think about high vacancy areas in our communities. It's going to be rural, it's going to be urban, and those institutions are stretched thin. If you're a substitute teacher there, there's not a lot of light between your substitute responsibilities and what actual teacher is doing, right? And this is a reality of what's happening in some of our schools as the vacancies are dire. So what we're saying is like, hey, we're gonna try to remove some barriers. We've got to figure out. So the Department of Education already has a profile for how mentoring has to go. It's already set. And what our job was is we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We said, hey, there's already a protocol for that. Let's see if we can implement it. With an apprentice, it's going to be different because this individual does not have the pedagogical background framework, there's a lot of things that you learn in the school of ed that these individuals are just not going to have on day one. And so what we're looking at now is like we have to think about mentorship a lot differently, and that is a challenge for an already strained system. Some of our school districts are not struggling with vacancies as much, right? So they have the ability to use this as an add-on to diversify, to add more, content areas. But other districts, they're relying on this model to attract folks so that they're not putting computers in front of kids. So when we're dealing with that level of like sort of crisis, and I don't want to be the the negative person here, but when you're dealing with that level of crisis, it makes it very difficult for everyone in this ecosystem to get the support that they need. The students, the teachers, the aspiring teachers, the principal, the superintendent, and we recognize that. And so we have looked at what David mentioned around, what is our responsibility as an intermediary? Should we hire former teachers in every region? Or professors, and have them serve as mentors? Is that the role that we should be playing? As a statewide intermediary, is that sustainable? We're trying to do this on the public dollar to the extent possible. And so there's some really big resource questions that are attached to that. But the mentoring for an apprentice, for an individual, particularly in that new hire, that second group I was talking about, for individuals who have been researchers, lawyers, mathematicians, whatever, and they're coming into this profession, they know their content. We've got to do a much better job of supporting their transition into the classroom. Mentors are it. We have a long way to go in that space, and it really does need to be looked at carefully.
Thank you. As you were talking about that challenge, we did get a question, and what do you do when you don't have qualified mentors in a school location? So that's some of what you were addressing. It might be for you and on the program to decide if you have to take that on centrally.
I think it's going to be an extra expenditure that we're going to have to consider in this, and a real expenditure, not just like the apprenticeship is the tuition is down and the testing fees are covered and all of those things, but we might be underselling the importance of an expenditure specifically for mentoring, and I think it's one of those threats that could kind of sink the boat slowly in a way that we're not recognizing.
Our primary mentors get $1,500 a year,
There you
go. And our secondary mentors get $1,000 per teacher apprentice during the duration of their program. So we said it's a 2 or 3 years split up. So they get $166 per teacher apprentice to check in with them. And I can send this to anybody, but we have job descriptions for secondary mentors. It starts with listen, 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 encourage, encourage, encourage. But one important thing so our secondary mentors were checking in. They're like, hey, what went well this week? I've been thinking about you. I know you got some challenges, and would send really well-intentioned emails like that. Our tappers came back and they're like, are you serious? I'm working full time. I'm taking 14 credits. Do I really got to tell somebody what went well or what didn't go well? Do I even have to reply to their email? So we had to actually pull back the secondary mentoring to not be so like you can't demand any amount of their time. If they just need to know that when something's going wrong, like political drama in their school, or they need a safe place to vent, that's when the secondary mentor swoops in and says, you can tell me anything and I won't be surprised. So that's what's worked for us.
All right, I'm going to move us on to a combination of the lightning round where you each get a chance. I'm going to start with you, David B, because of a question that we had out there that we didn't fully address, so I'll combine it. Around either a key takeaway or call to action. And for you, David B, one of the things somebody raised, they actually raised it as a friendly challenge to something you had said earlier, Kwame, where we were actually, to be fair, talking about how evaluating the effectiveness of these programs, how would we know? But they said, well, do we really know how to teach teachers? And I said, well, we were sort of talking about how do we evaluate teachers, but it was a really good point around, yeah, we've been doing it for a long time, but we still have problems with high turnover, which we don't know too much about yet for your program, since they're just kind of getting into classrooms. Like, how do we what's the promise of teacher apprenticeship in improving all that? Will we get good teachers who are retained? So in the lightning round about the promise or the one call to action or key takeaway, I'll start with you, David B. If you can include well, how will we really know that teacher apprenticeships programs have solved the problem we've been trying to solve?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say for me, number one is do apprenticeship models increase interest in the profession? That is kind of that would be kind of my go-to.
Great. That's a good key takeaway. Kwame, how about you? Takeaway or call to action?
Yeah, I think David B is sort of stolen the thunder there. This is a workforce solution, and I think that we have to just embrace the fact that there is an education side of this, right? How do we teach people? And when I say we know how to do that, we know how to do it, and we know that we need to continue to improve it. There's a whole infrastructure and a whole bunch of smart people on this thing that spend all their time figuring out how to improve the art and skill of teaching. Does it solve the problem of our pipeline? And that is a question that we have to ask. So our education system needs a lot. I'm not gonna say that we don't, but are we solving a specific problem, which is a pipeline problem, with this workforce solution?
Thank you. And David, you get the last takeaway or call to action.
Well, I think that this is a good opportunity to take a deep dive into teacher preparation. Why are we doing what we're doing? Because this apprenticeship movement has totally transformed our curriculum and our processes, like our openness to credits for prior learning, our competency option, our student teaching model. Like all of those have led to great conversations about like, yes, this is working, or no, this isn't, and then we change it. So don't waste this opportunity to make some important changes.
Thank you. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew for the wrap up and the questions we're getting in, including ideas for future sessions. Thank you. We're capturing all those ideas.
Yeah, thanks, Chill. I'll just have a few closing notes here if we want to go to the next slide, Kirsten. First of all, just thanks so much again to our audience and our panelists today. This was a fascinating discussion. I think all of us have a lot of food for thought exiting today. As you're thinking about that, we will post the recording from today's session along with the slide deck, which will include the links that you're seeing on your screen here, with the registration list after the meeting. And then hopefully within the next few weeks or so, we're going to be sharing the slides, the recording, along with a short summary of takeaways from this discussion on the Mathematica website, which you can also look at for more research that we've done on apprenticeships and teacher preparation. I think today was a really great blending of the worlds of the education and workforce research. And then also just a plug to follow the work of our panelists today, Kwame with the Teacher Apprenticeship Network in New Jersey, David DeYoung's Teacher Apprenticeship Pathway in Dakota State University, and then David Blazer's research and work with Maryland Equity Project. And then as always, follow up with us, reach out on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear about your ideas for future work, future webinars in this space. And a very quick plug too, if anybody is interested in further discussion on apprenticeships, we'll be hosting another webinar next week on Thursday, December 11th about apprenticeships in semiconductor manufacturing. So be on the lookout for registration and information there. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.